accessed the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Fellow Owens, you're tuned in to the podcast of OA, episode number 177. This episode, we're going to be talking about issue 3 of the Jeff Johns Green Lantern run, and we have a whole slew of listener feedback, plus an exciting announcement for our Facebook group. This is Myron Rumsey. I'm joined by my friend and your friend, sitting across the virtual table from me, my buddy Phil Bova. Phil, my friend, how are you?
Everything's going well here in the city of St. Louis, man. We're firing on all cylinders and everybody's pushing by the COVID, but I mean, everybody's pulling back on closing stuff. And like, a lot of states I see that they're going through a lot of issues with it being spread. So, it seems like everything that was trying to open is now being closed again. It's the ongoing saga of the 2020. I can't wait till this year comes to an end.
I tell you. I don't know if you've seen the meme on the internet, but it's the old the heck with it's 5 o'clock somewhere. It's 2020 everywhere.
God. I'll tell you, man. I can't wait till this year's over. Hey, while we're on here though, I do want to give a huge shout out to a listener, by the name of Paul. I don't want to give out his last name. He works with my wife Denise at her school. And longtime fan. He loves listening to us. He's always talking to her about our podcast and stuff like that. So huge shout out to Paul. Hope everything's well, sir. And I'm glad to have you guys listening, man.
That's awesome. So we don't have a whole lot of Green Lantern news, but the first thing I want to start off with is a while ago, back when we were doing the You Are the Core, I think we had our friend Daniel from the Blog of OA Facebook group on, and Daniel has been running a Green Lantern book club through the Blog of OA Facebook group. So they'll pick out a book and then they'll all read it and they'll get together using the Facebook Live or through video chatting, and they'll talk about the books together, which I think is such a neat thing for the community that we've been building. And, we've got about 2,500 people in the Facebook group. So he about these books. So Daniel has wanted to do something really cool with it. So he started a logo contest, a logo for the book club. And he went out and he bought from Mike Grell a Green Lantern sketch that he's going to give away to the person who has the winning logo contest design entry.
Very cool.
Which I think is awesome.
That's really cool. And go Daniel, man. I mean, I don't use Facebook because I've never been on it. What's his site? Do you know the name of his site?
Well, he does it through the Blog of OA Facebook group. So we have a community page, a Facebook group page. And so he's running it inside of that.
Gotcha. Okay.
So if you go to Facebook and you find it, we don't let anybody just enter. You have to ask to join, and then I'm kind of vetting it because we've had a lot of fake accounts and such trying to get into the group to, basically do social engineering and whatnot. So I always look to see, do those people have in their likes anything comic book related? Have they posted anything comic book related? And if they do, I let them in. If not, I don't. So it's not one of those open groups where just anybody comes in and we police it pretty well, but it's just a wonderful community. And he is running this little book club, and it's really cool. And this weekend, this Saturday on the 26th, they're going to be talking about Green Lantern, Green Arrow 77 through 80, which is, right during the whole Neil Adams, Denny O'Neil run.
Yeah, that's cool, man. That's a really cool idea. Plus having that sketch by Mike Grell. I mean, awesome. I want to get on there and win
it. Yeah, Mike Grell is one of those great artists. He came in, everybody knows him from Green Arrow, the Longbow Hunters, right? But he came in after Neil Adams. After the Neil Adams run happened, the book got canceled. And then Green Lantern for a while was a backup feature in the Flash book. And then when they relaunched the series, they left Denny O'Neil as the writer, but Mike Grell came in as the artist, and he just did a fantastic job. This probably sounds kind of like a heretic statement, but I actually enjoyed the Space Traveling Heroes Denny O'Neil, Mike Grell run more than the O'Neil and Adams run, to be quite frank, but that's just me.
I was talking to a friend of mine on Twitter today. This guy named Jay. He's the Journeyman on Twitter, and I mean, he's been around a while, and I've been following him for a while, but I never really did know how old he was, and I finally got his age, and he's like 16, 17 years old. And it was kind of comical because we got back and forth. We were talking about the Josh Williamson run on the Flash, and I'm just a huge fan of it. It's been amazing, and of course he's off the title now. And he asked me about. He goes, well, since you're a veteran, a longtime veteran, he asked me what my first comic book was, and he wasn't even born in the early '80s. I mean, this kid's young. And he started asking me questions about what it was like reading comic books in the 80s and stuff. And it was a really, really interesting conversation because it got me thinking of how complex and different the writing and the artistry has come since those times, and the in-depth storytelling and the big builds that are happening and the depth with characterization that they built upon with all these characters across the years and years and stuff like that. And anyway, long story short, I told him one of my biggest things I liked was Hal and Barry's relationship and how I miss it. And I wish they crossed each other's paths more. And I don't think enough is done with those two characters being together on a title. And hopefully somewhere down the line we'll get some of that again. But yeah, it was kind of funny. It was an interesting conversation I had, and it's like I felt like this kid's dad. It's like, okay, man, so this is what it was like back in the 80s.
I have action figures older than this kid.
I know, man. I mean, it's so crazy. And he's been great. I mean, he follows me, and we go back and forth all the time. He's a great guy, and I love talking to him. It was just, and then he asked the question, about the difference between modern and classic. And I said, I was like, I don't like either or better because they both serve a purpose. And, not only that, a lot of what was written, during that time was written for that time frame. So when you fast forward to where we are now, a lot of these writers are bringing back the classic elements, like Grant Morrison. We've talked about him ad nauseum about how much he pulls from the past and brings it forward and stuff. It's all there for a purpose. So I don't particularly care for one or the other anymore. So I like them both. And, I told him, I was like, I like them both. I love going back and reading the classics of like we're doing with the Johns run and the old Neil Adams stuff. And, I like the older stuff too, because that's where character building, took place. And look where we are years and decades later, and we're still talking about all these books, and that's what's important about the whole concept. So, big shout out to the Journeyman. I know he might be listening, might not, but it's good to hear from you. And hey, hit me up anytime. I love chatting.
Cool. So I don't want to get into this other topic too much because you and I are going to be doing an episode of the Lantern Cast, and this is going to be one of the topics in it, but I feel the need to follow up on it because we talked about DC fandom last episode, I think it was right after day 1 was over, and we were prepping for day 2 and hoping that there was going to be some Green Lantern content, even though there's nothing on the schedule, and to the surprise of no one, there was nothing Green Lantern related in day 2, despite HBO Max teasing something and Alex Ross teasing something. There really was nothing there. The rumor I've heard, and I don't put a lot of credence in these rumors because what seems to happen is somebody will start a rumor up to generate some clicks. But this was something said on social media that they had heard that there was something Green Lantern related and it was pulled. Why, I don't know. Maybe someday we'll find out what it was they were going to say. I'm assuming we were going to hear something about the HBO Max show, but we'll see. We'll see.
It's just clickbait.
It was just disappointing.
Yeah, it really was, man. And you know what? I don't have to live up to my end of the bargain, too. I don't have to read any Batman book or nothing. And I don't have to apologize to anybody because I was right. I didn't think they were gonna follow through with anything. And like you said, we don't have to get in depth about talking about that. But it is. It's disheartening, and it's a huge letdown. And I railed on him on Twitter. I let loose on it. I know you and I had contact that day, and we were going back and forth, texting and stuff. But yeah, I let loose on Twitter about it. I was PO'd, man. It's upsetting, but whatever. It's just typical of DC.
Yeah, it's disappointing. Like I said, I don't want to belabor the point because, well, it is what it is, and it's over with, and it's history. But in terms of good stuff, we've got a great issue of the Green Lantern run from Jeff Johns to talk about today. It's issue number 3, and it's the final issue in the first arc of the 2005 relaunch of Green Lantern. And it's one of my favorite issues of the early part of, the pre-Sinestro Corps part of the Jeff Johns run. So I'm really excited to talk about that. And then we've got some great listener feedback, and boy, do we got a lot of it. So I'm excited for that because I love hearing from our fellow Green Lantern fans and hearing what they have to say and responding to the questions they have and helping them out in any way we can when they've got a question for us. So I'm excited for that.
Cool. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. So we will take a quick pause and we can do the Your Core segment, and then we'll be back to talk about some comics.
All right. All right, fellow Owens, and welcome back to another Know Your Core segment brought to you by the blog of OA. This week we got a man by the name of, well, I can't say man because I'm not sure, Malet Dasim. And Malet Dasim hails from Space Sector 0103. His first appearance was in Green Lantern number 130 in July of 1980. He was created by Bob Toomey and Alex Saviuk. Can't remember. I'm probably not saying his name right. But let's go a little bit into Malet's origin. He was an officer of the Green Lantern Corps charged with protecting Sector 103. Shortly after the Sinestro Corps War, Green Lantern Liara murdered a surrendering foe, Amin Sur. The act was considered beyond the purview of the Corps mandate, despite the enactment of a new law which allowed officers to use lethal combat. Liara was arrested by members of the Alpha Lantern Corps, and a formal inquest was held. Malet Dasim was selected to act as prosecutor at Liara's trial. He recounted the events relating to the incident and provided evidence that Liara was acting out of revenge rather than justice. After reviewing imagery taken from Liara's ring log, he had little choice but to conclude that she was guilty. Following the speedy inquest, the Alpha Lantern stripped Liara of her ring and rank. And there you go, fellow Owens. Another awesome member of the Green Lantern Corps. We got plenty more to bring you as the weeks go by. I don't think we're going to run short of them. And we'll be back here next time for another member.
This is Razor, and you are listening to the blog of OA. You need to keep listening, otherwise I will track you down with all of my skill, and you will feel my wrath.
Well, welcome back. Hey, Phil, we got a great issue to talk about here. Issue number 3 of the initial launch of the Green Lantern run by Jeff Johns, artwork by Carlos Pacheco. And this picks up right after the last issue where Hal has been attacked by the Manhunter 2.0 at Edwards Air Force Base. And so he's basically surrounded by 2 different Manhunters. And Manhunter 2.0 is there to kind of get rid of Manhunter 1.0. But when he sees Hal there, that becomes part of his mission. And this issue is just full of so much action, and it ends the first arc, but it doesn't really end, if you know what I mean. I mean, it ends the conflict with these two specific Manhunters, but it sets the stage for something bigger, which is really cool. But this issue just was action-packed. I love this whole action fight scene in the beginning where Hal's trying to deal with Manhunter 2.0, and he's really getting the best of taken at him, and his wrist gets broken. I think at least once his arm is broken in this issue.
Yeah, that's when that Manhunter grabs him and tries to, and that's when he's tapping his wrist for the ring.
Yeah, he's trying to basically get at Hal's ring. When he sees Hal and he's fighting, Hal kind of lashes back, and so he targets Hal's ring, and the little wand comes out of his wrist and knocks Hal into a jet. And then we discover that Manhunters 2.0 have a power battery built into their head capable of sucking the energy out of a Green Lantern ring. So there's this really cool sequence where Hal is left with no power in his ring, too far away from his ring to do anything, too weak of a charge to let Jon Stewart know what's going on. He can't even fly. And he's got his arm or wrist broken in a couple places, and he's bleeding through his uniform. And the only thing he really can do is recourse. The only thing that comes to mind is to use one of the jets.
And he does it in his Hal Jordan etiquette.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about General Stone, and General Stone is a character from Hal's past who Hal punched out to get out of the Air Force. And I don't think they got into it too much here, much further, but there's a reason why he did it. And they kind of tease that, but they don't get into it. But Hal's got to take off, and he needs a ride, and he asks the general permission, and the general won't let him take the jet. And so Hal clocks him one again. So Hal's hit this guy twice now.
which he alludes to later on. He says, I've been knocking the draw twice.
And I recognize the fist or kind of thing. Yeah. But Hal gets in the jet, and it's the coolest sequence that's coming up. But before they get with that, Hal takes off. It flashes over to Sacramento, and it follows back up on that plot thread between Hal and his brother Jim. You remember in that last issue, there was a really great scene between the two brothers, and Jim just lives in fear. And this whole sequence really does a good job of framing it. Jim is there talking to his wife, and they're kind of having a little bit, I don't want to say a spat, but a disagreement about the kids, because Jim is so overprotective and won't let the kids play football. And it's really neat. On the coffee table, there's 3 books, and I don't know if you can see the books. You could probably read it better digitally, but the books are like, how to protect your kids from social media and things like that. And it was really, it just really kind of drove home that Jim really is afraid to live.
Yeah, I'm trying to zoom in on it, but it's kind of blurry. I see 3 of them sitting there by those blocks, right, in that picture.
Yep. Yeah, one of them says 100 things to make you safer.
Oh, that's what that is.
Yeah. How to protect your kids from something. I can't read it. I want to say it's from the media.
Well, even his daughter wants to watch cartoons, and he says, no, he bites her. No, they're too violent.
They're too violent for you. And the poor son, he wants to just play football like all the other kids. And he even says some even play with their dads, which I thought was kind of funny. But Jim really kind of has his family hostage. And then there's a news story that comes on that shows Hal rescuing the jet from the previous issue. And obviously his wife knows that Hal is Green Lantern because he's talking to his brother about it as Hal's on TV as Green Lantern, as they're showing him fighting with that jet. And then it cuts back to this scene. And I would love to see this sequence brought to life on the big screen or the small screen in live action. But Hal is flying the jet, and he's promised not to get it into a scratch, even scratch the jet. And he's going at the 2 manhunters. He targets them, fires a couple missiles, and that draws the attention of the manhunter. And then there's this really cool double-page half spread. It's like the upper half of 2 pages, and the manhunter plunges through the cockpit glass at Hal, and Hal's got nothing. He's got no juice left. His ring is at 0. So the engine dies in the plane, and the ring is dead. It's just basically Hal and his guts and his bravado, and it's this great thing. He goes, believe it or not, I still have a plan.
Yeah, that's an awesome shot of him going through the windshield like that, or the cockpit. Yeah, that's really cool. And I like how the glass is green, so it shows it cracking and breaking.
Yeah, I just thought it's such a great visual. Carlos Macheco really did a wonderful job with that. And Hal's outfit goes back to his flight suit, and he's trying to hold the plane together as it's spiraling out of control. And at the same time, the Manhunter's now returned his attention back to the original Manhunter, and he's triggered his self-destruct. So you've got Hal plunging towards Coast City in a flaming jet, and another Manhunter who lands down in Coast City who's about to explode with what's been described with the power of a nuclear bomb. And Hal still has a plan, and he jumps out of the cockpit and starts the oath. He lands on top of the Manhunter and recharges his ring on the Manhunter's head.
Yeah, that's a sweet. Those panels right there are just sweet.
I love it. And it's one of the things I love about how Johns gets the character, because that's exactly the kind of thing that Hal would do. He it seems impulsive, but it's not. He has a plan. He's got the confidence to pull it off. And here's a guy who jumps out and grabs the Manhunter, charges his ring on it, disabling that Manhunter, and then grabs the jet and grabs the other Manhunter and flies off into space where he blows up. And
keep in mind he rips the head off.
Yeah, he rips the head off, and he's still got the broken wrist. I just love it. And then, there's a conversation between him and John, and basically wanting to let the Guardians know, hey, the Manhunters are back. And Hal believes that they're back because he's back, and that his ring has in some way triggered the Manhunters.
And then, of course, you got Cowgirl coming on.
Yep. And you get Cowgirl come back, and she flirts a bit with Hal. And then Hal has that conversation with General Stone. And Hal kind of apologizes. And I love the artwork because Hal tries to apologize. And you can see he's got that look like he really doesn't want to apologize for what he's done. But he's going to anyway because he wants to get back in.
Right. I like his stance in that middle panel.
Yes.
It was my mistake. I regret it, and I apologize. It's just clear cut and concise. And he's got his hands behind his back.
Yeah, because he really doesn't mean it, to be quite honest. I mean, he doesn't. I mean, he did it. We'll go ahead and spoil it. He did it because when his father died and Hal went and became who Hal is, Hal couldn't give up flying. He wasn't going to live in fear. And so he enrolls in the Air Force at the age of 18. And I think it was actually right on his 18th birthday. And so his mother kind of wrote him off and disowned him. And then he finds out through one of his brothers that she is dying, but he can't get out of the military to go see her. So he punches Stone to get discharged so he can go see his mom. And
so
then
that's the first punch, right?
Yeah, that's the first punch. And then the sad, tragic part of it is she dies before he gets there.
Oh,
so he never has that closure, which is very unfortunate. But Hal gets welcomed back to the Air Force. So things are kind of right. And then there's this really neat sequence where Hal's in Coast City, and there aren't a lot of lights in the city yet because people haven't come back. But here's Hal, who's come back after all these years, and we get through this whole thing that basically Hal became Green Lantern, was it 15 years ago? I think it was 13 years ago. 13 years prior to this. So in terms of comic book time, Hal's adventures from his first getting the ring from Abin Sur took place in a 13-year window. So it's 13 years from Abin Sur's crash till now.
That's a really cool inflection point on these panels, and it's really kind of ironic because one of them says we're arming security systems, putting metal detectors in schools, and looking over our shoulders on airplanes. And it's like, yeah, that's pretty much this day and age we live in now.
Yeah, and there's that great line where Hal says, "Is fear what controls everything and everyone?"
Yeah, it pretty much is.
and as he's sitting there on the balcony kind of contemplating things, and this is a very introspective Hal, which is not typical, but it's neat to see. Here comes some lights, and sure enough, it's Jim Jordan and his family on their way back into the city, and the kids look up and see Hal flying down the street and in his ring, which is cool. And then we get the whole, what Johns is really famous for is at the end having a little bit of a teaser, and it jumps to the planet of Bayat, and we see the Grandmaster and some of the Manhunters, and we see the Lost Lanterns.
Yep.
And for most fans, the last time we saw Hanu and Kihan and these characters, Liara and Jack D. Chance is there, and Boudica with a missing arm. Yep.
It's Tomar Ray, yeah.
Is the last time we saw them was Emerald Twilight.
That's right. Oh, that's Jack Chance right in the middle, the blue guy, right?
Yep, that's Jack T. Chance. These are some of the characters that Hal encountered on his way to Oa during Emerald Twilight, and that he left them in a state where they had very little charge left in their ring, or left them ringless, but with enough energy to keep them sustained. And something has happened to them, and they are on Bayat for some reason.
That's interesting, man. Rereading this like I am, I didn't pick up on that at the time, but now I'm picking up on stuff like that. It's kind of fun.
It's really cool because part of back during the day of Emerald Twilight is everybody thought, well, these characters were left for dead because we never see them again. So Hal killed them. Well, he really didn't. He left them with enough energy to survive with, but something obviously has happened with the Manhunters and the Grandmaster.
Very cool.
So it sets the stage for something to come further on down the road.
As is John's.
That's very true. Very, very true. And I think, the early part of the run, I think because he had the time to plot this out in advance, he's not rushed. This is very deliberate. Everything is deliberate in the very beginning because he's rebuilding the mythology and he's rebuilding the supporting cast and adding new elements and taking things that are familiar to Green Lantern fans and putting a twist on them, which I think was, at the time, it was very exciting.
And of course, the next issue becomes the controversial Ethan Van Sciver.
Yeah. Well, Jeff Johns himself is now controversial, so
Yeah, that's true.
But anyway, just a fun issue. I loved this first arc that it tied in the classic elements of the Manhunters, just because it's stuff we haven't seen in a while. I mean, you got to remember back at the time, it had been 10 years since Hal was in print as an ongoing character, and a lot of these elements had just kind of been packed away. So it's refreshing because you don't know what Jeff Johns is going to do from issue to issue, and what is he going to pluck from the past? What's he going to reuse? What's going to be repurposed? What's going to be new? Just a very exciting time to read the book.
It is, and it's fun to revisit it, And this goes back to what I said earlier. It's like a lot of these writers bring back these old concepts, these old characters, and they reuse them again, and for a reason. There's a purpose, and they're all, like Grant Morrison does it a lot in his run. He brings back a lot of the older stuff than more Johns did on his run. But there's always a reason why there's a building template from your classic comics, man, because it makes them relevant today. Even now, looking at these, we've seen Hanu. I think we've seen Hanu in the Morrison run, right?
I'm not sure. We might have. But I find the elements of Hal's introspective thing on fear is just as applicable and relevant today as it was back then. I mean, he wrote this back in the days after 9/11, right, and how the country was responding and how everybody kind of got into this very fearful attitude. And he was commenting on some of those things, but it hasn't really changed. We're still there in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and we probably will be for quite some time.
And I think that's one of the things that makes Green Lantern such a relevant character, because fear has not gone away and it won't go away. As long as we're human beings, we'll have fear, but it's our ability to overcome it. That's the interesting part of the narrative, is how do we overcome it? How do we deal with it? How do we live with it?
Well, and not only that too. I mean, it's like that's one of the first emotions you get from childhood is fear. I'm afraid of the dark. I'm afraid of the boogeyman. That's a lot of where that stuff comes from. It's embedded in your psyche from an early age. Fear of going to the dentist. That doesn't change. I don't like going to the dentist when I'm 47, 46. But that fear is relevant. And it always is a relevant emotion, which is what makes the Sinestro Corps one of the most important corps in the Green Lantern books. Which, quite honestly, I wish they'd use a lot more. But hopefully the next writer coming along will change that dynamic.
Very true. So thank you, everybody, for following along with us as we revisit this issue. And we'll be doing the next issue at some point. I think we've got, probably the next time we record, we'll have a new issue of the Morrison run. So we'll probably kind of go back and forth between that and this series for a while yet. But I'm enjoying it. I really love going back and rereading these because it's neat to relive that stuff. It's one thing to go back and read your classic comics, but there was something magical and special about the Johns run.
Well, and in that whole early 2000s, I mean, it seemed like comics were quite different back then, And the thing that upsets me the most is Johns used to be a prolific writer, back in then times when he was reinventing characters. He did it with Lantern, he did it with the Flash and Rebirth, he did it with Aquaman. But I mean, obviously the guy's changed over the course of time, so has his priorities. And I read some of the Doomsday Clock, and I didn't buy it. I read, it didn't seem like his stuff, if you know what I mean. And I don't know. To me, I don't think his heart is in the writing like it was back when you read these. True.
All right. Well, let's take a quick pause, and when we come back, we will be doing some listener feedback.
We got a lot of those too.
This is Robert Vendetti, and you're listening to the podcast of OA.
All right, Phil, we've got some great listener feedback, so let's get right into it. Now, the first two messages are both from Corey. So we'll read the first one and respond, and then he sent a second one afterwards, and we'll respond to that one after that too. But here's Corey's first message. Hi, Myron and Phil. Thanks so much for reading my email in the last broadcast. I expressed my frustration about the Morrison run, but I'm open to having my mind changed. Between writing that email and the airing of the last episode, I went back to older podcasts to hear what you guys had to say about Earth 1, Volume 1, and the beginning of the Morrison run. I only recently discovered the podcast a few months ago, and it's been so enlightening. Hearing your reviews and breakdowns of The Green Lantern makes me want to go back and give these issues another shot. I know Morrison's writing is dense. I had my wisdom teeth removed a few years ago, and I decided to read Final Crisis for the first time during recovery. Maybe it was some kind of metaphor that I was in extreme pain as I read Final Crisis. That's what I kept thinking about it when it was announced Morrison was writing the Green Lantern. I don't think he's a bad writer. In fact, he makes me wish I was a little smarter to be on his level. And that's the thing. There's currently not a plethora of Green Lantern series like we all wished and still was. So for the one Green Lantern title out there, it should be reader friendly. I've listened to a lot of your podcasts where you talk about when readers should consider starting reading Green Lantern, obviously Rebirth or Secret Origin. I can't think of when it would be a great time for someone to start reading Morrison's run. I recently read The Flash Volume 2, number 135 that was written by Morrison, and it was straightforward storytelling. Morrison has it in him. Having said all that, I appreciate you guys taking the time to break down the current run to help dunces like me understand it better. I promise I will go back and reread Season 1 and Season 2 to hopefully appreciate it more. Thanks for all you do and keep your power rings charged. Corey, thanks for that. I feel the same way sometimes when I read the Morrison stuff. I feel a little silly that I'm wondering, like, am I just not getting certain things? I think that's normal. I do think that his stuff, by and large, just reads better collected than it does as single floppy issues. But even then, I certainly get it. I wish that there was more straightforward storytelling. You get kind of used to reading stuff that's very, I don't want to say old school, but very typical, very classic, like we're reading the John stuff. And then you get to a Morrison story where it's a lot of these heady concepts or strange dialogue or something that really makes you have to go back and reread. And sometimes it feels like it's more work than entertainment. And I certainly get that. And bravo to you for getting through Final Crisis. I tried reading that one and I struggled. I still haven't read Multiversity all the way through yet. I've started a number of times, but I have yet to be able to finish it. So you're not alone at all. And I agree with you. It's not new reader friendly. So how do you take a reader who's never read Green Lantern, who's interested in it, and give them a book like the Morrison book as their first Green Lantern issue? I really would struggle with that. I don't think I could recommend it.
That's the problem with it. This Green Lantern is the only title that's out there. So, you hear about the other Lanterns in the other books, like Justice League with John Stewart and, of course, Jessica Cruz and Odyssey and stuff. And then the Far Sector, I kind of dropped off Far Sector. I kind of got to the point where I didn't really think I was interested in it anymore. And it's not a disservice to the character, but I felt like that was straight storytelling that was happening over there. It was pretty concise. I wouldn't say it's not on the level of Morrison. And a lot of people need to understand that, when you go in reading Green Lantern and Morrison as a writer, you go in with hesitation, like we did when we first read issue number 1 a long time ago. I remember you and I talking back and forth about our reservations about him and how he was going to do it and stuff, and what Morrison we were going to get when we were reading it, and look, here we are in season 2, year 2 or whatever it is, and we pretty much know what Morrison we're getting. But for the average reader to jump on just with issue number 1 and work their way forward, I don't think they'd have a full grasp and understanding of the Green Lantern character with just Morrison and his writing. I think they'd be better served going to do Gabriel Hardman's, Green Lantern Volume 1 and 2, the Earth one, or going back to the Johns run, or even stepping into Venditti's stuff. I think you get a better concept of Green Lantern and the Green Lantern Corps in its entirety but Morrison's stuff is kind of set aside. To me, it feels like it's bracketed. It's not part of the collected universe that DC has done. I mean, there's no connective tissue between Morrison and the Green Lantern run and the main DC universe. If you've noticed that, I mean, there's no allusion to the Justice League. I mean, sure, you have a couple characters pop up here and there, but there's nothing about what's going on over in the main titles, like the Metal event or whatnot, and as a juxtaposed next to the Green Lantern run with Morrison. So to me, I always felt like this whole run with Morrison and Sharp has been compartmentalized by itself, and it's in a universe by itself.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's easier to kind of wrap your head around it if you think about it being completely its own thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only way you really can. I mean, a lot of the other titles do cross over. Of course, Batman appears in everything, so you got no problems there. But, the Justice League stuff kind of crosses over. There's the whole death metal event that's happening. That's crossing over in the other titles. I mean, Josh Williamson just wrote Speed Metal, and that was crossed over with his Flash run. So Green Lantern, to me, with this stuff has been by itself. And, while I appreciate it, I miss Hal Jordan being around some of the guys. I miss him being around Superman. I miss him being around Wonder Woman. I miss him being around Batman, and those other characters and intertwining. I like relationships, even though they're complex and they may not get along. They're there for a purpose, and to serve a greater good. And to me, Hal Jordan has always worked well with others, but he hasn't worked well with others, and that's what's made him stand above the rest.
I agree. So Corey's got a second message, so let me read that one. It says, sorry to bombard you guys with so many emails. I've really gotten used to reading digital comics over the years. I don't mind physical copies, but I like the convenience of reading digital books. Since I spend a lot of time on the DC Universe app and Comixology, I noticed that neither carries Green Lantern Volume 3, Issue 1 through 47, which I thought was odd. I found out about Gerard Jones about a year ago and knew that he wrote Green Lantern at some point, but it wasn't until I recently listened to episode 146 of the podcast of OA, where you guys reviewed issue 1 of volume 3, that it emerald dawned on me why issues 1 to 47 are not on either of the apps. My Green Lantern fandom really only started about 10 years ago, so instead of collecting Green Lantern in the early 90s, I was wasting my time reading Batman. Am I right, Phil? So what is your opinion of Gerard Jones' run on volume 3? I can't recall anybody really pointing to the beginning of that series as must-reads or very memorable, but I'm not sure if Emerald Twilight and the introduction of Kyle Rayner or Gerard Jones' unsavory personal life have just overshadowed the beginning of that series either. Since the books aren't available digitally, and as far as I could find, those 47 issues were never collected in a trade paperback, is it worth hunting down all 47 issues? I'm curious to read it, just to read it, but I know the only way is to find all the physical copies. The minimalist in me prefers to fill out my digital long box instead, but it doesn't look like that's possible. Any feedback is appreciated. You guys are great. Well, thanks, Corey. Appreciate that. I'll chime in with my opinion on the early part of the Gerard Jones run in volume 3. I think early on, Gerard Jones had some specific plans for Green Lantern, and they aged Hal up, gave him the gray hair, the gray streak hair bit, like Mr. Fantastic. And it was very much about Hal rediscovering himself. And, at the same time, Gerard Jones launched the John Stewart solo miniseries Mosaic. I think they came along a little bit after. But during the run, the stories in the beginning were better. But as the run kept going on, a new editor came in by the name of Kevin Dooley. And Kevin Dooley and Gerard Jones did not get along well. And so the relationship soured, and so the book became more of a chore for Jones. And, Jones would say, this is what I want to do, and Dooley would disagree. And they kind of, behind the scenes, had this battle going on. And I don't want to say it's one person's fault or the other, because it sounds like in reading interviews with Jones that he did afterwards, it was just a bad marriage, for lack of anything better to say. And so I think it progressively got a little worse. And it gets to the point near the end where after the destruction of Coast City, Jones does a story with Hal and Green Arrow, which sets itself up for his version of Emerald Twilight. And for a lot of fans like myself, that was one of the many reasons why I struggled with Emerald Twilight, because the issue prior to that, Hal and Ollie are talking about the destruction of Coast City, and Hal's at peace with it. You know, he's I don't want to say he's moved on because it's fresh. It's still fresh emotionally, but he's not overwrought. He's come to terms with it. He realizes it's a part of what's going on. And after all, he really didn't lose anybody he knew in Coast City. He hadn't lived there for a long time. It wasn't like the relationship between Batman and Gotham City or Superman and Metropolis. That wasn't the relationship that he had with Coast City at that point. He'd been moved out of there for quite some time in terms of the print run. Is it worth picking up? It's not a bad read if you can find them cheap. Now, it might be hard to find some of those issues. I know there's one website called atomicavenue.com, which is a basically reselling port where collectors put books that they have in their collection that they're trying to get rid of up for sale. And they've got all 47 issues are sitting there for sale. And most of them, I think the most, it costs $2 for an issue. Some of them are under $1, if I recall. So if you really wanted to piecemeal it together, you could do it. But I agree, you're probably not going to find it in a collected edition or released digitally because of the circumstances surrounding Gerard Jones. I thought it was funny that in the Green Lantern 80th hardcover, there was an issue of Mosaic by Gerard Jones in there. That was surprising. Phil, did you read that run?
Mm-hmm, I did, but I'll be honest with you, it's been forever and a day since I've read this particular run. As a matter of fact, I think I might even have this collection digital. I'd have to look through my whole hard drive to find out. This was the one with Joe Staton did the art on all these.
I think Pat Broderick did most of it.
Pat Broderick. Okay, so this was volume 3, right?
Yep.
Is what he's talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'll have to look and see, because I know a lot of it was focused on Guy Gardner appeared a lot in that series, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, there was a really cool some cool moments between and Hal and that version, and it was very much Gerard Jones trying to look at the wandering Hal who left Ferris Aircraft and did all these weird careers. How do I get him back to some semblance of what he used to be? And so that was kind of the whole. I think the first arc was called The Road Back, if I recall.
And the Mosaic I think came out in issue 14.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, wow, it's been a while since I've touched these, but I mean, it was good stuff. I mean, I try to keep the personal lives of the writers out of. I mean, they have to do something really, really bad, in terms of like we're talking like Ted Bundy bad, as far as like killing a bunch of people bad, for me to really, really place a writer into his secluded spot where I'm never going to touch his material, and so a lot of times I'll segment and put that aside because of their personal beliefs. They don't infect my own, because I know where I'm 46 years old. I mean, you're not going to change my mind, so a lot of times I don't mind what that writer does. And just because I read his stuff, that doesn't mean I like him. I mean, I may like the stories, I may like what he's written, but it's not infecting me in a way where it's going to give me any kind of negative vibe just because he has some scandalous stuff that's happening in his personal life. I don't agree with it. Keep that in mind. Gerard Jones has his faults, but the stuff's still cool to read. I mean, it's still Green Lantern material, and it's still fun to traverse through all these different variations of the character. And like John Stewart back then, he was different. I mean, he looked entirely different than what he does now. I mean, even his costume looked pretty cool back then. I like what they had with his costume back then. But to be honest with you, I'd like to go back and reread this. We should do a Mosaic one sometime. That'd be kind of fun. I haven't read that in years.
Yeah, it was a pretty trippy book too.
Yeah, it really was. And I liked Guy. I liked how Guy was written. I mean, he was it was typical Guy back then, from what I remember.
Yeah, it was definitely when Guy was almost a caricature.
Yeah.
It was fun. But Corey, thanks for writing. I'll put a link to Atomic Avenue in the show notes. But if you really want to pick up those issues, that might be your easiest one and done way to get them.
And also, Corey, hit me up on email sometime and let me know. I'll have to look through my stuff and see if I have a lot of digital content that I've collected over the years, from different people that I bought it from. So I might even have it. So hit me up on email and let me know. And what I can do is, I don't know, maybe put it in a zip file and send it to you. Not sure. Just, if you need to contact me, you can find me on Twitter or whatever. Just let me know.
All right. So, Phil, you've got the next one?
I do, and this is from Tomar Ka. It's a short one. All right, Tomar says, once Grant Morrison's run on Green Lantern is done, which writer that hasn't previously done an extended run on Green Lantern would you like to see? Curious where Tom King ranks on your wish list. All right, well, that's an interesting question, and that's pretty much the $50,000 question at this point, right? Now, I did contact you the other day, and you heard a rumor of who you heard it might be. Do you want to divulge the rumor, or do you want to feed into that monkey?
Well, supposedly, if you looked at the December solicitations for DC Comics, it was either December or November. Mark Waid is back at DC doing some work, and so what we're hearing is, and again, it's a rumor, but what we're hearing is supposedly Mark Waid has been offered Green Lantern. Don't know if he's taken it or not. And people are of varying opinions about that. I personally, I don't like Mark Waid's version of Hal. He did 2 miniseries. He did JLA Year 1, and he did a Flash Green Lantern book called The Brave and the Bold that was a 6-issue miniseries. And his version of Hal was, I guess, okay. It didn't thrill me a whole lot. But who knows what he would be writing if he was writing Green Lantern. Was he offered the main Green Lantern book? Was he offered a Green Lantern Corps book? We don't know. I'm not a big Mark Waid fan. And I try not to let what happens outside of the comic world affect me. But some of his antics have just kind of left me less of a fan, to be honest with you. And I don't want to drudge through the mud and the murk about it. But there's just some things he's done I'm not keen on. So he would not be my choice. Tom King, I really did like the book he did during the Dark Side War, where Hal gets the power of light and he kind of becomes the god of light thing. That was really a neat book. And I know he has said to me on more than one occasion when I've had a chance to interview him or see him at a convention, he's always said that he thinks that Hal Jordan is the most fun character in comics to write. I'd be interested to see what he would do with it.
He's a good writer. I mean, he's done great. He did great with he did the what was that? The Omega Men title.
The Omega Men, yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he did that, and then of course he was great on Mr. Miracle. I mean, that was a fantastic book. And then right now he's doing Strange Adventures. I haven't read any of that yet. I don't know if I'm not sure if I'm going to get into it or not, but I mean, he'd be a good choice for it. I don't have a favorite. I mean, I'd like to see Venditti back on it, but that's not going to happen. That's wishful thinking.
Yeah, I don't think he'll be back. I think, he was put in such an unenviable position and got a lot of flack for it. But, when he was given the ability to write the book without a lot of editorial interference during the Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps book, I thought he really shined there. People have loved his work on Hawkman. And yeah. I haven't had a chance to read it myself, but people had glowing reviews of his Hawkman stuff.
It's good. It's really good. Another writer I'd like to see is Josh Williamson. I know he's off the Flash now. I think he's doing something else, so I don't think he'll take on Green Lantern. James Tynion wouldn't be a bad choice either. But again, I think those guys are all lined up to do other stuff. God, there's so many to name that I think would do a good job. Mark Waid doesn't. I mean, you're right about what you said about Mark Waid and his version of Hal. It's kind of curious to see what we get. But we asked that question about Grant Morrison and what we were going to get from Grant Morrison, and here we are. We got this really, really complex title almost 2 years out, and what comes next for Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps after that, especially when they reshuffle all these titles around, since Odyssey's coming to an end. Jessica Cruz now has to find a place to land, and I don't see her just falling off the map. Justice League will just keep going. I'm sure John Stewart will just be in that book for who knows how long now. And again, we don't even know. I mean, Guy Gardner. We don't know where half these lanterns have been. They just. I'd like to see Carol Ferris come back as a regular. Sinestro for that matter. But I guess it all depends on what writer we get, and what DC tells them what they can and cannot write.
Right.
Well, it's a good question. I don't know. I mean, you should put a poll up. Who you'd like to see writing Green Lantern in 2021, and see what people say. I mean, my choice is Josh Williamson, but I don't. He's done such a great job with the Flash character and building on the mythos of the whole Flash family and the Rogues and stuff. And I think he could do a lot of breadth with the Green Lantern stuff, but I won't hold my breath. He's going to be on that.
I'm interested to find out who's going to write a Green Lantern book afterwards, but I'm even more interested in finding out what book or books are we going to get afterwards.
That's the $80,000 question right there. I mean, it seems like everything with Green Lantern is shrouded in this mystery or this big secret. Don't talk about it. We can't talk about it. It's like, I don't know, man. We've said this before, and I've said it again. It's like it gets old. I mean, there's Green Lantern fans out there that they need to have their appetites whet, and it's like, give them something, for Christ's sake. Just a little bit of tidbit of information. But I don't know. Just with Green Lantern, there's just everything's kept in some kind of shell, and nobody wants to talk about it. But that's DC for you.
All right. And then the next one is from Joseph.
Joseph says, "Hey Myron, I have read issue 7 of season 2 a couple times and was curious if you caught this. When Carol is talking to Zundernell, he described the multi-crisis as the war across wavelengths. I assumed that this potentially meant the ultraviolet, radio, and other variations of the unseen spectrum. Not sure if I was looking too far into this, but I wanted to know your thoughts. Thanks and keep up the great work." Well, before you answer his question, just know that you're never looking too far into anything when it comes to Grant Morrison's writing. So, as you were, Myron.
Well, I did catch that, and it reminds me of, back in the early part of the Morrison run, there was a whole thing where the Guardians were talking about the lanterns of different spectrums and so on, and they showed Ratlap Fan, and then they showed some other things that really didn't make a lot of sense, and certainly wavelengths or things that we can't see, like the ultraviolet, certainly makes sense. And, we've seen over in the Justice League book that John Stewart became an ultraviolet lantern for a period of time. And I don't know if he still has it or not, because I haven't been reading it, but it wouldn't surprise me to see him pull something into it. Then again, it wouldn't surprise me if he just made reference to it and he's going to do his own thing with it.
Well, over in Justice League, there is a multi-crisis event going on. I mean, maybe that has some kind of connection. Not sure. I mean, could be like that's a really, really a shot in the dark. But I mean, I don't know. That's just my only input. And John Stewart's just a regular Green Lantern. He doesn't have the ultraviolet anymore.
Doesn't have it anymore. Okay,
no.
That's cool.
No. All right. So, all right. Thanks for that, Joseph. All right. On to Stewart. And he's alluding to our last episode review of issue 7 as well. Good discussion on this issue. One of my favorite things on this run is Morrison's take on the old and young Guardians. While I didn't mind John's take on the Guardians when they were the authority figures that I usually see in fiction, but Morrison's take on Guardians really shows them being high-concept figures in DCU without bringing down their characters, but still showing the need for GL's place in the universe as a form of balance. I also thought that line about Hal saying the young Guardians were too young to understand how the universe works is very interesting, given the current state of modern comics and stories being told. All right, well, 2 very good points there, Stuart. Myron, what do you got to say about that?
I agree. I do like Morrison's take on the Guardians and how they're younger, and even though they are immensely intelligent, they still don't have the experience. That's what they're lacking. So they have knowledge without experience, which means they don't have understanding. And I think that's really interesting. as things go on. And I wish we got to see more of them, and maybe we will. We've still got a number of issues left, and a little bit more in the next 5 issues.
Yeah, that'd be cool. They're quite different than the usual Guardians that we're used to. I mean, to me, they seem like they're more. I guess the only way to say it is more alien looking than just comic book ish looking, if that makes any sense.
Definitely.
Yeah.
You definitely get a sense in this run that it's a very European style book.
Oh, okay. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. And that's Morrison. That's just Morrison in a nutshell.
Absolutely.
Right.
So thank you, everybody, for your comments. We appreciate it. And please keep on contacting us. We love to hear what you guys have to say, your comments, your suggestions, your ideas, your questions, all of it. We love it.
Yeah, definitely. All good stuff. All right, fellow Owens, episode 177, locked and loaded, and we're going to put that in the files section. What'd you think, Myron?
I had a lot of fun. I did think there were a couple of things that I forgot in the opening that I didn't put in the notes. One exciting thing that is happening, or has happened, is that you can now find the podcast of OA on Amazon Music. Oh,
that's right. I remember you sent that out on Twitter a while back. That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, Amazon is now partnering with the podcast hosting service that we use. And when they announced it secretly several months ago, I put us in right away. So when they launched it, we were included in the launch, which is exciting. So it's yet another way to find us. It's a little odd to try to promote it on the podcast to say you can go listen to us there, because obviously you found us if you're listening to this conversation at all. But it's exciting one way or the other. It's neat to be a part of that and have yet another avenue for people to find us. The other thing was, I forgot to ask you, Phil, how did you celebrate Batman Day?
Trolling. I trolled Twitter. I sent out my hate pictures. There was one I sent out. I didn't send the usual Hal Jordan punching out Batman.
Oh, I did it for you.
Yeah, I saw that. I did the Flash one. Which was, there's a cool image of the Flash, and he's got his fist going right at Bruce Wayne's face, and he goes, "I could hit you 100 times and you'd never even know it." I sent that out. Then, of course, I had my Twitter friends, railing on me, sending me stuff every now and then. So, but I will say that Clark wore his Batman socks that day. That wasn't by choice. That my wife put those on. So, Tomorrow he's wearing his Flash socks.
so she get in on ribbing you a little bit too.
Yeah, but she's a Batman fan, so that's just the way it is. So that's kind of how I celebrated. I threw out my hate for him. It's all in good fun.
It is.
Oh my God, I'm just sick of the man. I'm sick of hearing about him. Now and now they're talking about Batman Ben Affleck, and then they're talking about Michael Keaton Batman. It's like, how many Batmans we need? Jesus, how many Jokers do we have now? But hey, another good news that we should share is that we're going to be appearing on the Lantern Cast pretty soon. All of us are getting together.
Yes, yeah, it's going to be an interesting episode. We usually get together and talk about the state of the Lantern universe, but Chad Bolkelman and Mark have a really neat, Mark Marble, have an interesting idea for an episode where we're going to talk a little bit about how we feel DC is treating Green Lantern and how we feel they should be treating Green Lantern. So it should be a great episode. I'm looking forward to it.
And we're not going to whine like babies like we do sometimes on here. I know I do every once in a while, but we're not going. This is going to be a very intelligent roundtable discussion about how Green Lantern fits into the DC universe and how he should fit. And we're going to bring up arguments, and we're going to hear all sides and state our case. And then we're going to package that up, and we're going to ship it straight to the offices of DC Comics, and we're going to make everybody listen to it.
All right. Well, I don't know if that'll be between now and the next episode, but if not, we will definitely be promoting it when it does come out, one way or the other.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks again for joining us and making us a part of your fandom. Until next time, be safe, take care of each other, treat each other well, keep your power ring charged, and as always, make every day your brightest day. The Podcast of Oa is the official podcast of the blog of Oa and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of Oa and the Podcast of Oa on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of Oa and the Podcast of Oa are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.